Thank you all for joining us for this session entitled How to Find Your Voice. We're very happy you could be with us today as part of the 1455's Summer Festival hosted by 1455 Literary Arts. I'm so excited to be joined today by Alyson Weinberg. She's a Washington, D.C. based poet, playwright, speechwriter, and ghostwriter. Yes, all of those amazing things, which we'll hear about today. She's the 2021 first prize winner in poetry of the Inner Loop Lit District Fray Writing Contest, which was judged by Jose Padua, a 2021 finalist for December Magazine's Jeff Marks Memorial Poetry Prize, judged by Carl Phillips, and winner of the Derek Burleson Poetry Prize. She's a 2022 finalist for Harbor Review's Jewish Women's Poetry Prize. Alyson's poems have appeared or are forthcoming in December Magazine, Tiny Seed, New Guard Review, District Fray, WWPH Writes, among others. Her play, Object Relations, received its live stream premiere in April 2021 to benefit mental health equity in Washington, D.C. It was called A Broadway World Hot Pick and now is in development for stage. Alison studied English and creative writing poetry at the University of Maryland and completed postgraduate work at Georgetown University, Johns Hopkins University, and the Bread Loaf Writers Conference. Now, I'd love to just kind of kick it off. I mean, that her background's so illustrious, but I'm really, really excited to have her here today.
I'm so excited to be here. There's probably nothing more painful as an introverted poet than to hear your bio read to you. But thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And thank you, 1455, for including me. It's a real honor.
Well, it is. We are grateful for you. And I'd love to hear a little bit more. I know, given the work that you span so many things, tell me a little bit about, I know you have a consultancy and sort of a little bit about your evolution.
Yeah, so there's kind of a cute story. When I was graduating undergrad at University of Maryland, I had a meeting with my advisor, who happened to be the very incredible poet, Stanley Plumley, who is the former poet laureate of Maryland and just brilliant. And so we sit down in his office and he's like, okay, so here are the MFA programs you should apply to, and just keeps writing in. And I'm kind of like, oh, I need to make some money. I need to support myself. So I'm going to go into advertising instead. And he said, advertising will kill your soul.
And has it? And did it?
It didn't, actually. I mean, I do feel that my poetry background really prepared me for a lot of the work I do in strategic communications consulting. And it did allow me to make money and also keep writing poetry during that time. So I feel like I got the best of both worlds in a way. I think, for example, when you're writing ad copy, having, a grasp of meter and rhyme is really important when you think about ad copy that really sings. And I know you're familiar with that for sure in your own work. It's a poet's ear, I think, that you're hearing when you hear really good ad copy. So that certainly was like a plus. And then I moved into speech writing pretty early in my career. And for me, since speech writing is a poetic medium, really, it's a spoken medium. Poetry is meant to be spoken. Things like cadence and pacing are really important. And as is, voice, you're capturing the voice of the person who you're writing for. So, I've written for very different kinds of people. I write for an energy executive now. I used to write for Eunice Kennedy Shriver. And it's all about kind of capturing that particular person, which I think is very much kind of a creative writing poetry skill.
No, that's fascinating. And I think, in terms of speech writing, so they're sort of probably related, this notion of speech writing, and I know you're also a ghostwriter for books. Can you tell me a little bit about that and sort of how did that even begin, moving from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so many things in life, from my perspective, the best things are these kind of good surprises. I think we all focus on the bad surprises of life and sort of the shocks and traumas, and those, we hold on to them so hard. But the best things in life to me are the good surprises. And so this was one of those. I was working with a client doing strategic communications, and just one day, kind of on a call, they said, "Hey, do you want to write a book for us?" and I said, "Yes." But I thought, why not? They, for some reason, trusted me. They liked my writing, and I kind of just taught myself how to write a book by writing their book, which was really nice of them.
That's incredible. And so how did that process differ? I mean, in each of these writing genres or styles, I would assume the process is really different. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's funny. I think sometimes I call myself genre fluid. I think, like, for me, the content dictates the structure. So, for example, if I'm ghostwriting a book, a lot of what I will do is, create this process where I speak to the writer, probably weekly on the phone or over Zoom, so I can literally hear their voice. And I ask them kind of off the wall questions, because for me, I want to loosen them up and get access to who they really are underneath kind of the executive demeanor. Most of the people I've written for are executives who want to share their knowledge. And so I'll ask things like, what music did you listen to all by yourself in the car in the summer with the windows rolled down?
That's a great one.
And Liz, I would be wondering what you did in high school. Like, what did you do? What was your favorite song to listen to with the windows rolled down?
I was in a Bruce Springsteen state of mind.
Yes. It's interesting. I think, like, I've gotten a couple Bruce Springsteens, and yeah, he's pretty evocative and poetic, obviously. I did get one Lionel Richie, which was like,
oh, I love that. Yeah, I love Lionel. Great
one. So actually, that's sort of fun. We took that. So, I learned that they really loved Lionel Richie, and then I placed them in, fictionally, but it was in their sort of voice at a Lionel Richie concert to illustrate how well Lionel Richie, kind of communicates emotion, and sort of the way strategic communications can do that. And so it became this really fun way to illustrate something for them that I wouldn't have expected. But again, like, surprises are the best. So, so that's the ghostwriting process. The poetry process, I feel, is very organic. I've been writing poetry, I'm not going to tell you how many years, but since I was a young teen. And in that case, it kind of just, I'll get like the sort of feeling or outline of something that I think will be a poem. And it's not so much as creating it intellectually as kind of tuning into a radio station, kind of hearing something and tuning in so the static goes away and I can really, hear it. And I do believe it comes from our own unconscious mind, most art does. So it's kind of tuning into my own unconscious and writing it down.
Oh, that's incredible. And I think going back to, I don't want to walk away from that, so I'm going to come back to that, but I want to go back to something you said about the ghostwriting and hearing people's voice. And I would, having to put yourself into their voice, how does empathy play a role there? Because I don't know if everything you've written has been business related or other sorts of story, but empathy and sort of being able to do that. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I know that in terms of finding voice, that's got to be critical.
That, I think empathy is huge. Empathy is sort of the engine that lets us do this kind of work. So I've written on some very diverse topics like media and communications, the environment. I ghost wrote a book about technical debt, something, like technology, something I know nothing about. It was a very different voice than writing, sort of how to solve climate change or, how to create a great, communications campaign. So it's really important to, again, be able to step in the shoes of your subject. And so that's where really that empathy comes in. I think as artists, and particularly poets, I think, we're kind of translators. We take our empathy, and that allows us to put into words the ineffable or the unspeakable, the difficult to understand. And, I think a lot of poets come into this world with a sensitivity. A lot of artists come into this world with sensitivity. And then sometimes we have experiences that create empathy in us to a greater degree. And in my case, having a difficult childhood made me very sensitive to others' feelings and moods, which is not, a great experience growing up, but is now a gift that I have, that I feel others' feelings, and I hear others, sort of not hear their thoughts, but hear their intention behind what they say. And so that has actually been, an enormous asset in my work. Not that anyone should hope for trauma or difficulty, but sometimes when we get that gives us our greatest gifts.
Yeah, no, I think that's always the starting point, whether we want it to be or not. It's ingrained in us and it's innate to us. And so it sounds like for work, you've been writing for other people. And then what pushed you to sort of move into, how did the timeline go? Reading your bio, it sounds like this was all, have you been doing this whole time? Was it pandemic? Like all of these things?
Yeah, that's a great question. There were many, many years. So I've been writing poetry since before college. So, we're talking more than 30 years of being a poet, and studying poetry and not submitting it and writing only for other people, either speech writing or ghostwriting. And I had this experience in my own life, and it was during the pandemic that just kind of was so infuriating and heartbreaking that all of a sudden I felt like I had nothing to lose. And I kind of made this pact with myself that I would write in my own voice. I don't know if I'll ever do a book again for someone else. Sorry if anyone needs that, I can refer to it. But I do still do speech writing. It's very important to me because a lot of the people I write for are advocates and, making a difference in the world. But yeah, so I had this situation in my personal life that sparked me wanting to create something. And as we talked about, for me, the content dictates the form. And I hadn't written a play before, or at least since high school. I used to write plays for my friends and, kind of spoofs on what was going on in school and kind of hand them out in notebooks secretly. But, and my brother will tell you, I made him star in a lot of productions. This poor child. I wish we had an image up here, but suffice to say, he was a very tiny skinny Peter Pan next to a very tall and robust Tinkerbell. And it wasn't good. But anyway, so this play, I realized it was a play. I realized it wasn't just a poem. It was too big for that. And it wasn't a fiction book. It was a play. I could hear the characters walking around and I could hear what they were saying. And so I wrote this play called Object Relations about a poet who uses her poetry in a psychoanalytic setting to process her childhood trauma. And it gave me an outlet through my own anger and grief about this real life event to examine power dynamics, issues of attachment, betrayal, creativity, consent, and like just explore all those things in an enormous catharsis in a fictional therapy room. And in a sense, it also was a form of protest. I was really angry. I was done wrong. But like many, many people, when there's a power imbalance, I knew that my kind of dealing with it through the legal system would have been much more traumatic for me than just like writing the hell out of it and like setting it on fire on the page. And so that's what I did. And it felt great. And I think what's even more important is it was a form of therapy. It was therapy within therapy, really.
Yeah.
But it also becomes art. And that's the beautiful thing about art. So it starts out from this impulse to share and get catharsis, but then it's on the page and it's a real thing. And you can evolve it and change it and detach yourself from it enough that it doesn't feel like your guts anymore. Hemingway famously said, write drunk, edit sober. Which I do have a bar here, but I don't usually write drunk. I don't ascribe to that, but I do advise people to write from the unconscious mind and edit from the conscious mind. And I think, if you can tap into that, you can create something really beautiful, and then you can come at it from a, almost objective perspective later.
Oh, I love that. I took one of those free writing courses once, and it was so interesting to see where you start from and then where you end up. It really is. I can't imagine what you do in terms of writing plays and poetry. Would you be comfortable sharing some work that speaks to how you free up your voice?
I would love to share some of my work. So of course there are poems that, free up the individual and the individual's voice and make them universal. I think that's what we love about poetry and art in general. And I also think that art has the ability to leverage voice and speak to larger issues and even speak truth to power when things in society feel oppressive or scary or stifling. And so I've been really grateful for all of the artists out there who have been writing during this time. And I would love to share two poems I've written recently that feel particularly kind of germane to the world we're in now. The first one talks about the helplessness that many of us have felt during the pandemic and sort of the waiting and restlessness that at times has really been intolerable to all of us, of course, of a lesser degree than worrying about family health and worrying about racial injustice, but just that feeling of not being in control and wanting to grasp at something. So this poem it's sort of in conversation with the mythical Penelope from the Odysseus myth. And you'll notice it's in iambic pentameter, which, to me ties it to the classic work, but also it puts form around something that's difficult to contain. So I'm just gonna take a sip of water.
Please.
Ars Pandemica. stitching left to right, then right to left, engaging both hands and both spheres. The mind grows quiet. The fingers come alive with color and softness, the repetition of movement. It's soothing knitting. The pressures of the present fall away like waves, pull back to ties that bind, to mother, to ocean. Pull Penelope back and forth to her loom, for 3 years in and out of her room to undo daylight. Weaving is not so easy to unravel. Knitting is knots and needles, tangles of blues that somehow something become. Penelope weaves and unweaves the shroud for Telemachus. She passes the time counting stitches, not millions of minutes. She unbids her work. She unbids goodbye to Odysseus. With each row, unbinds her work, rebinds herself to him, to Ithaca, to a world that was and can be again. No one can make her let go. Penelope can make it never be so by rending the very garment she's sewn. Raveling and unraveling mean the same thing. Here I am, dashed against the rocks of a city that burns in a world that still turns but barely. I am the new penny who knits and unknits to shore up her footing. In this cold time, I make and unmake scarves to warm the hearts of people I love. My wrists, my fingers burn and ache, my work imperfect, too rough, too bright, and not soft enough. The stitches I make, I must pull out one by one in one long motion. I must remake what is broken. I must the sadness push and pull away with hands deep in knots, with mind cleared of troubled thoughts. With hands, I remember the pleasure of things. I remember the art of losing, the art of knitting, like poetry on blank space, embroidering a story, no backspace, no backspace, distracting from loss, tending the presence of love, forever ending a line by beginning the next one.
Wow. That was so magical.
Aww.
Before you start the other one, I have a question. So in that instance, what was the nugget, the seed that you started with?
I've had a pretty lifelong obsession with Penelope. To me, it's been so beautiful that every day she would knit this shroud because she was commanded to meet other suitors and leave Odysseus behind. And I found it so beautiful that she would every night, in this unbelievably dedicated fashion, unknit it, unweave it. And so during the pandemic, I literally did take up knitting. And I found myself realizing oh, wow, this helps. This helps. I'm binding myself to the people I love, and I'm unbinding myself to this difficult waiting and this difficult time. So that's what happened. It was pretty literal. I think I was knitting and I was like, oh, I got a Penelope poem.
Yeah.
I wanted to write about her for years.
Oh, that's incredible. So did you want to read another poem?
Yeah, I'd love to. One moment of sort of caution. This is a poem about pregnancy loss. If you're somebody who feels triggered by, if I start to read it, it doesn't feel good to you, this is something you can, tune out for a second. And, I certainly want everyone's self-care to take precedence. I've chosen this one because, I wrote it because, there's a moment in this country where people are losing autonomy over their own bodies in lots of different ways. And in my experience of pregnancy loss, there was a procedure I needed to save my life. and now it is outlawed for half the country. And so other than that, I think it speaks for itself. Planet Earth is blue. At 13 weeks, I saw my tiny astronaut float across the ultrasound, tethered to the mothership. The doctor said everything looks perfect. Then something like heartbeat, not. We need to abort this mission. Awake, knees in the crash position, spaced out on Versed. After the evacuation, I said, I want to see him again. I have read some planetary nebula form from materials shed by stars in their later stages of evolution. It is not recommended. I've also read that other nebula form from supernova explosions, the death throes of massive, short-lived stars. I did catch a glimpse of his cosmic bits and pieces, hydrogen and other ionized gases. Then the lid closed on a jar, on my deep crimson flash of starlight.
What could be more powerful at a time when we're all, reconciling nonsensical things happening? And I think you talked about not silent protest, but words being able to give power when we don't feel power, right? That's I'm sorry you went through that, and thank you.
Of course. I mean, it's one of the unfortunately, a million stories, and mine is by no means the most traumatic one at all. I had access to good health care. I was very privileged to have that. And so we have to keep talking.
Yeah, no, it's true. That is for sure. So I hate to sort of switch a little bit.
I think we should switch it
up. Yeah. I'm going to switch and talk. I really want to talk about playwriting, since that was something new for you.
Yes, I would love to.
So how is I know you said work dictates shape. How is your process different from ghostwriting poetry when you're writing a play?
Yeah. So, it's kind of like more voices in my head. And actually it's a small play. So it started out with only two voices, which were the therapist and the patient. And I'm very privileged to have close friends who are magnificent actors. Like, again, there are a lot of playwrights who write and, don't have friends to call and say, hey, do you want to try this out for me? So like, as in ghostwriting, which is collaborative, me and that other person, and speech writing, which is collaborative. For me, playwriting, and I don't think everyone works this way, but for me, that's a very collaborative process. So as soon as I got, kind of a frame on paper, I called my friend Susan Derry, who is a Broadway vet, and my friend Tolvagen, who's a Broadway vet, and we just got on Zoom during the pandemic and started workshopping it. And we later added Liz Shivner to the group, and so she rounded that out, initially in a very small role of the receptionist, which now, as we prepare for stage is a much larger role. But that all evolved out of, again, speaking and hearing. So like voicing and listening to create something. And, they would read the lines, or they'd misread a line. They'd kind of misread a line, and I go, oh, that's better. That's better than what I had down. I'm going to put your line down. Or they'd be like, my favorite is that Liz will say, are you married to, and then like give something that I'm like, I'm not, but a lot of playwrights are. So like, give me your idea. We'll talk about it. But they're all brilliant. So no, I'm not married to it. Like I want the collaboration and I want the interaction and it was just so much fun. But yeah, so the thing that about kind of teaching myself playwriting was, you know, I could hear the voices. I had a sense that I wanted to include poetry. I had a sense that poetry would be very important as a currency between the two characters, but I needed a plot. I needed a, you know, sort of a climax to the play and, you know, sort of a rising and falling action and all the things you expect in a play. And so that, you know, took a couple iterations to really nail down and rewriting continues.
And I've heard you say or call your style magic realism. Is that an accurate portrayal or?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of identify as a magic realist. Like when I think about people like my husband, who's an optimist, and then of course there are people who are pessimists. And for me, I think that's who I am. I kind of want a t-shirt that says it, if we can, you know, I gotta work that out. To me, that means that, you know, growing up, I was somebody that, you know, had a reality that was challenging in a lot of ways, and my brother and I, and because I was naturally an imaginative kid, my coping mechanism, and kids have tons of them when they're in, you know, a challenging childhood or trauma, but mine was imagination. And so I created a magical reality, which, to be honest, I didn't know was a reality until many years later in psychoanalysis. I thought it was true. I firmly bought into it. My brother bought into it. We were little kids. We thought our house was haunted. There was just a whole world that we created that was no less scary, but was created by us. And in it, we could protect each other, and we could, you know, kind of have power and control in a way that we didn't in real life.
And does that come through in all of your writing, or are there certain styles that?
Yeah, I think there are certain mediums that lend itself more. I mean, I'm on the lookout for any magic realism in any art form. I love it. Certain, you know, films I think are just so brilliant because of that. Like I love Pan's Labyrinth, any Guillermo del Toro, actually. But I would say for me, it does come into my poetry. I think my identity as a magic realist, it kind of makes me a poet. And then some of my poems are more of that bent. And certainly the play has a big important scene that goes right into magical realism. And there's a lot of magical realism in the play itself. So I think that'll be really fun for people because it's a therapy room, which is a literal room where all these things happen, but around it, this sort of unconscious world is alive, sometimes within the room.
Oh, that I can't wait. We're going to get to that in a second. Now, there's a poem you mentioned to me that I know has magic realism in it. Would you like to read that? Sure. I'd be honored if you'd read it.
I would love to. Let me find it. Okay, so I'm going to say a little bit about the origin of this poem, but not much. It's another one that deals with childbirth. And this is me imagining my birth. I was born in 1969, 4 years before Roe v. Wade, when mothers were routinely put to sleep when they delivered children. And it sounds insane to us now, but that was the way it was. So this is called I Enter the Picture, 1969. Hurl into the world, Baroque Mother in light blue nightgown rests in bloodless, anesthetized twilight, present, removed, a portrait, a prelude. My father in uniform, in handsome, cradles me in crook of arm, beaming us home where waiting is the night nurse who will rise and bottle my parents' formula to get some shut-eye. In this wink, the nurse holds me. Her smile yearns to slide from her face, a dolly clock. My soft spot melts. My baby head swerves from her shoulder. A mostly empty handle of gin turns the earth.
It's incredible. And by the way, my mom was asleep with all three of us as well. Yeah. Wow. Yes, I know. Well, they also drank and smoked during pregnancy. It was a whole different, it was all just all of it.
They definitely all smoked. It was a different world.
Yes, it was. It
like
was
more fun to be pregnant and less fun to have a baby, maybe. I don't
know. I know we skipped over one poem. I didn't want to skip over that. If you wanted to go back and read that, since this is a conversation, we can take this where you want.
Do you know which one?
I think it was My Father Was.
Oh, yes. That's another. So that to me really speaks to the idea of writing about trauma. I mean, I do it a lot. I do sometimes write happy poems and actually, sorry. But the play is very funny. It's darkly funny, but it's very funny. So anyway, this poem, and this is funny too in a way. So my father was kidnapped by his father. Truly.
Okay.
And wow. When he used to tell us about it, it would be very much like, yeah, your grandfather picked us up and it was great. We went on this trip across country. And I'm like, and by then I was, probably an older teenager and saying things like, well, did grandma know where you were? No, he didn't tell her where we were. How long were you gone? Yeah. So he kidnapped them actually from summer camp. Lots of special stories in this family, but anyway, so for a long time, I didn't know how to write about this one because his tone, and I think you'll see in the poem, his tone, his voice belied the content.
Right.
So he's talking about trauma, but he's so offhanded about it in real life and in the poem. So my father's father kidnapped him. Dad said it was not trauma. First rides at Coney Island, then the drive west. He and his brother in the back, 3 Lone Rangers in a 1953 Buick Roadmaster tearing it around an American summer. My dad and uncle wore Davy Crockett hats, scratched messages with sticks in the dirt. In musty motel hallways, they sat back to doors, trying not to hear my grandfather screw their not mothers. He doesn't say that part.
It's such a contradiction. I mean,
yeah.
Wow.
You ask him anytime, he'll tell you it was really fun.
Isn't that wild?
It's how we protect ourselves, right?
Yeah, of course. Especially growing up then.
Yeah.
Where so fewer things were discussed.
Fewer things were discussed, and they just lived really in sort of the collective unconscious of our families and are passed down. The trauma is passed down whether you say it or not, which I think is really interesting.
No, and it's going back to your play for a second, because I know, and it's interesting you say there's poetry in the play, but I know you talked about workshopping and I'm not sure if, how much is fully scripted or ad-libbed or whatever. So what stage of production are you in, and how has it evolved from, as you've been working with them?
We're in a great place. So I think you mentioned earlier, and if not, I'll share that I thought we got it to a really beautiful place. And we had a Zoom reading in April of 2021. And 400 people showed up on that Zoom, which was really special. It's like an off-Broadway theater seating. Mm-hmm. And we made it a benefit for mental health equity in the nation's capital, which was very important to me, mental health access, and especially. So the characters in the play are pretty privileged, and so they got the care that they needed, but a lot of people don't. So hence the benefit. And it went really, really well. We got some really great feedback, and there was a Drama Desk Award-winning director who happened to see it, and she's really jazzed about directing it. So I worked with her a little bit to create a new script for stage, and we have that now. So we really just need, production. We need a stage, we need the producers, and we're kind of ready to go. And it has changed a lot for those, anyone who's seen this, who actually saw that Zoom. There's a new character who is non-binary and plays the receptionist, which was a tiny role in the first version. And they add some really necessary humor, just as I tried to add some humor to this conversation, despite the darkness of some of the content. The receptionist really functions as bringing humor, and also almost like an MC, kind of like you would see in a musical. So this actually does have a music aspect to it. In the original, if you want to know what I listened to when I was in high school with The Windows Down.
Oh, yes, I should have asked you.
You would hear it in this play. It was in the original, and it's going to be in the future iterations, but I love classic rock. So I am like Led Zeppelin and Nirvana and Jimi Hendrix, and I think there's some Fiona Apple in there, and Jefferson Airplane.
Oh, yeah.
And so it worked really well, kind of just using it within the Zoom. But what I realized is I wanted the receptionist to sing that music. And so that character now is the front man / woman of a group called the Defense Mechanisms, which is kind of like a band of street musicians who hangs out outside this office on M Street in DuPont Circle. And they, kind of drift in and out. They're never really in the therapy room, because we don't want to compromise really the true kind of therapeutic boundaries, but they are in and around, and then sometimes kind of intruding upon the narrative. So yeah, it's very different, and it's kind of,
gosh, it sounds like there's something for everyone, and there's I can't wait for object relations. And so I understand, like, another treat, you have a scene to share with us. Can you set the stage, so to speak?
Yeah. So Liz Shivner will be playing Sam, and Anne Tolvagen, who is the original Mimi, will be playing Mimi. And they're going to do a scene in what is called a staged reading. So it's not going to look like a play to you. They'll likely have their scripts, and it'll be very stripped down, because the focus of a reading really is the relationship and the text of the play. This scene is the wildest one in the play. It's the climax of the play, where magic realism really takes hold of the narrative. And if you've ever been in therapy, which many of us have, you know that there are certain conventions in the therapy room that just are, and you kind of keep abiding by them. Like, you always sit in a certain part of the couch, and you might walk in with your Starbucks and your therapist has a cup of tea next to them, and you always greet each other the same way. And you know, they might say the time is up the same way every time. There are just certain conventions. And so up until now in the play, there's been pretty much, you know, typical therapy conventions, although Mimi has pushed the line of appropriateness. She keeps pushing it. And Sam is kind of like that frog, that mythical frog that gets slowly boiled to death because initially the water feels comfortably warm like a bath, and then they end up boiled. So what I wanted to do with the scene was to show the contents of Sam's head. I think she's at a part of the play at this time where her unconscious is telling her there's something wrong here. This relationship isn't necessarily what I thought. I might not be safe here. And so while it looks like the therapy room in some ways, it's actually a conversation that's taking place in Sam's head. And so the conventions of therapy are gone. The look of the room has shifted, and all hell breaks loose. So anyway, here are Anne Tolvagen and Liv Shivner as Mimi and Sam in Object Relations, Scene 7.
Mimi and Sam inhabit Mimi's office. The established boundaries between them have been erased. The room appears dreamlike, distorted, less solid. It feels off-kilter, rearranged, upside down. Rorschach 7, a door, words, branches, ducks, a lion, and other symbols from Sam's poems are projected onto the walls, the actors, and the floor during the scene. Sam begins in her place on the couch, eventually taking the full range of the room as she recites her poem like an animal stalking her prey. Mimi starts in her chair with a legal pad, taking copious notes. It's the first time we've seen her do this.
The wildness. There are a lot of places I like, but I like New Orleans better. Bob Dylan. In '88, you could walk Magazine Street for miles of nothing. Hungry as Gandhi, and eventually there would appear a health food store, temple to greens and cereals, twig-like fibers and solutions, grains to line your tongue, earned communion for the walk home. To the habitat you call your own, between Audubon Park and the zoo. At dusk, big cats would preen and groom and roar, drown out the growls of your holier-than-thou empty stomach, both sounds signaling the insistence of animals demanding to be fed. Yes, I nursed at Nola's breast, lips pressed against the garden district's bruise-hued clouds, body not rounding out, but distilling down to its essential, like a willow, whose very name means lamentation. And that man who dashed my same path around the park, who jacked against a tree as I ran by, athletic shorts down around his thighs, ass gleaming at the dawn, he belonged. So did the plump of ducks that once lined the banks of the Mississippi, singing to me from the book of Isaiah, "You kept me from the pit. You put my sins behind you." For a time I did wholly belong to this wildness, voice hoarse with bellow and hiss. That's who I was. Once.
Kind of cracked wide open, didn't you?
Something I'm trying.
It's something I'm trying.
Why now? As therapists, we ask that.
Puts it back on the patient.
My therapist left me for 3 weeks, a month.
I hardly think.
4 weeks of sessions, Mimi, ergo month.
Potato, potato. Your poem reveals quite a level of masochism. It's one of my favorite things about you, you know? The pain you'll endure for just a glimmer of transcendence. You weren't kidding about that double major.
Sadomasochism in the psychoanalytical dyad. I just wish you'd fuck the fuck off, Mimi.
Well, that's not a nice thing to say to someone who's not even here.
Where are you again? The Galapagos?
South Africa. Galapagos was last year. Was that Myanmar?
Galapagos.
Such a sharp student.
The sharpest. You may no longer be needed.
You're mad. Mad, I say!
Madness is all we get. From you, Ophelia, our ragged fingernails.
Selected words scroll around the room.
Dog-ear your
wind
pages.
begins to blow.
Hearts assailed by crushes, rashes, braces. We wish to disappear into wisps of verse like you. Instead, we grow up, gasping for living things.
Who wrote that?
I did. It won a prize.
You didn't mention it.
I did not.
Why?
You left?
On the teeniest little sojourn to the southern hemisphere.
I was suffering.
You fell in love with suffering a long time ago, Sam. It's as familiar to you as breathing, and one might say, as essential.
Stop shrinking me.
You're the one who's shrinking. I think you're coming to realize that.
This poem is for me. It's mine. The syntax, diction, music, rhyme, reason, pacing, beauty, and pause. This is my independent clause. It's not for you. Line break, emphasis, words unsaid. You don't get it. Don't get what's in my head.
And yet there's plenty of room in here for me to take up space, for me to take what I want.
You are a familiar monster.
Oh, time's up.
Keep digging. Call me Sammy.
Sam searches Mimi Rose Marcus scholarly articles. She finds one about freeing up the creative spirit, intuits that she should open it. Words scroll across the walls, the storm intensifies. Rain pelts the window, trees bend, wind howls. She lies down and enters a fitful sleep.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was an incredible treat. And I know the audience is really going to want to know how to see object relations. We're all going to be waiting with bated breath. And can we see the reading that happened previously? Is that on Facebook or?
We've actually pulled it off because we're starting to talk with producers and we kind of have to keep it, keep our good boundaries and protect our intellectual property. So we're not allowed to do that, but I will, follow me on social media and you can always stay updated with me.
Of course. And Alison, thank you so much for sharing so much of your evolution in finding your voice. And I think this probably will spark for a lot of people ideas in terms of empathy and cadence and magic realism. So really, I can't wait to see what happens next.
Oh, thank you so much. I hope it's valuable, to folks. And I really, really enjoyed talking to you and thank you for the opportunity.
We're grateful. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us for Finding Your Voice. We're so pleased you spent this time with us, and we hope the discussion's been valuable. Please be sure to check out 1455 Literary Arts at www.1455litarts.org to learn more about the organization and the free programming offered throughout the year. Thank you again to all our guests. Have a great day.
Thank you, you too.